Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And I'm pleased to welcome Jusper Machogu. He is a farmer in Kenya. And we're going to talk about farming in Kenya, energy, power, and many other things in Africa. Jusper, welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Now, I didn't warn you. I warned some guests. I didn't warn you, but guests on this podcast introduce themselves. So I've said you're a farmer, that you live in Kenya, but please, if you imagine you've arrived somewhere, you don't know anyone, and you're asked to introduce yourself, please, by all means, introduce yourself. You have about 60 seconds. Go.
Okay. My name is Jusper Machogu from Kenya. I'm an agricultural engineer and also a farmer. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Do I start afresh?
I'm sorry.
Can I start afresh?
No, just keep going. That's okay. You're doing fine.
Okay. Okay. So my name is Jusper Machogu from Kenya. I'm a farmer, an agricultural engineer, and I'm also fuel advocate, especially in Africa. And I'm really happy to be here with you, Robert Bryce. Thank you.
So tell me, you said agricultural engineer. What does that mean?
Okay, like I have a bachelor's degree in agricultural engineering. That's basically farm structures, renewable energy. That's part of the curriculum, the funny thing. Then farm power and machinery, etc.
And where do you live in Kenya?
I live in a place called Kisii. Kisii is towards Lake Victoria. So that's where I live currently. Although we also have another farm in the Rift Valley, we also do farming over there. So, but basically, I live in Kisii.
And where and what? So I don't know my Kenyan geography. I'm looking it up here as we're talking here. So
near Lake Victoria.
Near Lake Victoria. And so, what is the population of Kisii?
I think right now we are something like 2 million, 3 million.
Oh, so it's a pretty big. It's a pretty big city then. So you're
not a city, basically like a town. But I live in the rural areas, so.
Okay, and so I'm looking at Nairobi. So Kisii is northwest of Nairobi. So how long would it take you to get to Nairobi from where you are?
About 4 hours, 3.5.
4 hours driving.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what do you grow? I follow you on Substack. And by the way, I should mention that Jusper is on Substack, juspermachogu.substack.com. That's JUSPERMACHOGU.substack.com. I know from watching your videos that you grow corn. You call it maize. What else do you grow? And on how many acres? And how many hectares?
Okay, people over here have small farms. Basically, like a family has got about a household has got about half an acre of land. But in other places, if you go to the Rift Valley, people have big tracts of land. Over there, we have about 5 acres of land. That's about 2 hectares.
Right.
So, we usually do maize because maize is our staple food in Kenya. Also, people in Kisii do vegetables, avocados, bananas, and finger millet, and tea. Tea is usually for commercial purposes. Like we sell it to the factory processes it, and then sells it to international markets and bits of like locally a bit.
So, what do you make the most money on? You personally on your project your land in Kisii, you grow maize.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that where you make your money then? I mean, because farming is a hard business. I know some farmers here in the U.S. This is not an easy industry, regardless of what you're growing. But is maize profitable? Do you sell most of what you grow? Do you eat most of what you grow? Walk me through the economics.
Okay, basically, most people over here do maize farming for like sustainable living. That's what they live on. So like an example, we harvest maize. Okay, we grow maize, we harvest it, and then we mostly consume it, and then maybe sell a little bit to our neighbors or local markets. we buy sugar, soap, and stuff like that. So our maize farming is not for like making lots of money, making us rich. It's usually we're just living by the day.
So is it fair to say that you're doing subsistence farming? And I don't mean this
We
as a
are,
okay. So,
we
but
are.
do you take that as a derogatory term, or is that just the right description?
I think that's the right description because that's what we usually do, subsistence farming.
And so you farm, you said about 1 acre, half a hectare there in Kisii. And is that enough? You can grow enough corn for you and your family on that property to sustain yourself for the year?
Usually yes, but most people don't because like if you are a family of 6 people, that's not going to be enough. Most of the time we harvest around 2 tons per acre of maize compared to the US 11 tons per acre, per hectare, sorry. So 2 tons per hectare, that's about 1 ton per acre, so little. And that usually cannot sustain most families, most households, so they have to buy more maize. Actually, in Kenya right now, most people are like our country is uh, importing maize from other countries, and that's not a good thing because, of course, of uh, other issues that we're going to discuss, but mostly fertilizers.
So by importing maize from other countries, then it depresses the domestic price, which is bad for you.
Actually, because like we cannot produce enough maize to feed everyone in the country, we have to like source some from outside countries, from other countries.
Right. So
Yeah.
let me back up for just a minute to just get a few more details. I know you're talking to me obviously on Zoom here, so you have electricity, but I also just looked up. I track electricity issues pretty closely, and in fact, I just wrote a piece today and published it about what's happening in Africa, and Kenya has 53 million people. The average electricity consumption in Kenya is 223 kilowatt hours per year per capita. The world average is 3,500. In the US, it's 12,000 kilowatt hours per capita per year. So the average American uses more electricity in a week than the average Kenyan uses in a year, just for some perspective there. So obviously, you have electricity service. Is it reliable? Who provides it? From where do you get your power in your home, and how are you powering our conversation here?
Okay, so we have about, I think last year we were at 80% connected to the grid, to the national grid, or 75. Right now, I think we maybe 85% connected to the grid, and that's a good thing compared to other African nations. So mostly, okay, we have Kenya Power and Lightning Company. They supply the electricity. We have another company, which Kera, which usually buys electricity from independent power producers, or it does produce itself, some of it. So they buy the electricity, they supply to KPLC, KPLC supplies to us. So that's how we get our electricity. And it's okay. It's a good thing that we have electricity, but we consume so little of it because, of course, poverty, poor people. So giving poor people electricity is not a great thing at all. It's a good thing, uh, but it's not a great thing. It's not going to make a big difference in our economy. Sorry. So,
And well, let me interrupt.
for
So
instance,
why is that? Because you can't use enough. You can't afford it. What is the problem?
okay, electricity. Actually, electricity in Kenya is quite expensive. I think 0.19, that's like 19 cents per kilowatt hour compared to the US, I think about 15, 14 around there.
Yeah.
And China at I think 10 cents, and at night 4, 5 cents. So we have expensive electricity, despite the fact that most people are connected to the grid. And then I think the problem is we have like our government is chasing wind and solar, especially we our government markets itself out there as the country with the largest wind plant in Africa, as if that's a good thing. So the problem with um, poor people having electricity is the only thing we use electricity for is charging our phones, listening to radio, watching TV, and lighting. Only that. for instance, in my family, we are 6 people. 6 people. Each and everyone has got a phone. We have a TV and some lighting, and we use about 12 to 16 kilowatt hours per month. That's so little compared to an American refrigerator, for instance. So
I'm sorry to
it's
interrupt.
crazy.
I just want to make sure I'm hearing you, Jesper, because I'm kind of crazy about numbers, right? I dig deep into the numbers. So you're saying that you're 6 people in your house in Kisii,
Yeah.
and altogether you consume 12 to 16 kilowatt hours per month.
Yes.
This is
And
a very
most people, by the
this is
way,
a very very small amount of power. You know this.
yeah. And most people around here, they don't use that much electricity because, like, okay, our bulbs, an example, our lighting has got, I think, 7 watts. The bulbs 7 watts. They're rated 7 watts. So we just need lighting and charging phones, and that doesn't consume much electricity. For instance, my phone consumes about 1 kilowatt hour per year. So it all makes sense.
Right. And so what is the solution there? Then follow up on the electricity. I'll come back to the farming and the hydrocarbons in a little bit, but what would you, if you could, what would you use? How would you use more electricity? Would you get a refrigerator then? Because that's one of the other things people buy, as I understand it. Look, I grew up. I've been incredibly privileged in my life, right? I never knew a living without a refrigerator, right? My grandmother did, right? But I've always had a refrigerator since I was a kid. I have one now. Would you buy a refrigerator if this was affordable and you could afford the electricity? What would you buy to use more electricity if you and your family could?
Okay, so let me start with the solution.
Sure.
It Yeah. So what we need is energy, and that energy isn't going to come from just electricity, as most people advertise. That energy is going to come from fossil fuels, because, like, if we want to power our tractors, we don't have tractors, but we're going to have tractors. We're going to need tractors because our population, most of our population, I think about 70% of our population, they are directly employed by agriculture. About 85% earn a livelihood from agriculture. So one of the easiest ways, actually, even in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, in Africa as a whole, 60, 70%. So one of the easiest ways to improve these people's lives is by improving agriculture. How do we do that? What we need is to power our okay, what we need is tractors so that we can till more land. What we need is fertilizers. Fertilizer should be number one, because, like, right now the amount of fertilizer that we use is so little compared to what others use. For instance, most Kenyan farmers use about 20 to 30 kilos of fertilizer per hectare. In other places, if you go to other places, I think if you go to a place like Uganda, they use about the same 20. In other places, Botswana, 16 kilos per hectare per year annually. If you go to a place like the US, you use 120 kilos per hectare. If you go to Europe, 150. If you go to India, 250. If you go to China, 350, 360 kilos per hectare per year. So what we actually need is we need access to fertilizer, synthetic fertilizer, and that's going to change our lives completely, a lot. Like, we wouldn't even need aid. So the two things,
Well,
fertilizer, farm mechanization.
you mentioned that part on the fertilizer. I saw one of the things that what's intriguing about your Substack is how often you use video to show what's happening in your life. And one of the ones that you did just recently showed the size of the maize that you're growing with fertilizer versus the ones that are not. And your yields are 4 times higher with fertilizer than without, something like that.
Usually 2, 3. It can go up to 4 because, like, we use so little.
Uh-huh. And so
Mhm.
you identify on your Substack as a pro fossil fuel and let me see. You said you're a pro fossil fuels and a climate skeptic. Let's take climate skeptic last, or first rather, because I want to, this is something that to me is, I mean, it's kind of a wonder of the modern world, right? That you are on Substack, that I'm even talking to you now, that we're both are on this platform, that I've been a journalist my whole career, and I just landed on Substack because it was the right place for me to write. And for you, it was this ability to get an international audience from a place in rural Kenya, which is pretty remarkable by itself, right? And just mainly using your phone, am I right? Or using a laptop as
Yeah,
well, or just your phone is how your
usually my phone.
is your is your
Usually my phone.
is your portal to the world, right? So I mean,
Yeah,
that by itself, it's almost magic, right? To even think about it in this way, right? That is incredible technology, but
yeah.
with very little spending on your part. I mean, let's be frank. So, but let's talk about that climate skeptic. Why do you identify as a climate skeptic?
Because I came to realize most of what climate scientists out there, climate scientists in quotes. So what they usually say, okay, they alarming the world. They're telling people, an example, they're telling people hurricanes are getting worse, they're getting intense. It's not true. Droughts. So like, okay, I think last year there was a drought. This year there was a drought in Kenya, and there was a lot of talk about what climate change has done in the Horn of Africa, in Kenya, stuff like that. They were showing donkeys dying. What they don't show people is go back a few years, go back 100 years, 200 years back, and you read reports. So there was a report back in, I think, um, 80s, yeah. So the report had like, okay, it was one of, I think, a student in Nairobi University, a PhD student. He was doing a thesis on droughts in Kenya specifically. And he was saying, like, if you go back to 1910, 1890s, there was a drought and people were selling their kids so that they could afford food. So what caused that drought? Like, people need to ask themselves such simple questions. So I've been a climate skeptic for some time since I read Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom by Patrick Moore. I've been a climate skeptic since then. I was by then I was a Greenpeace member. I thought the world was dying, and I thought we were a cancer in this world. Like, we were doing a lot of damage to the world. And I came to realize, like, after reading Patrick Moore, I came to realize it was all a lie. And I've learned so much on climate that I didn't know. And what I see usually on Twitter is people spreading propaganda that they don't know is all lies. Like, this is the best time for humans to be alive. This is the healthiest, this is the most educated, the longest, like, we're living the longest in human history from 35 years in 1800 to today, 72 years old. So, like, this is the best time for humans to be alive. And all of that is thanks to fossil fuels. The fossil fuels climate skeptics are saying we need to do away with. We need to stop using fossil fuels. It it has made the world to be this way, to be safe.
So why do you think? Well, let me ask this question because it was one of the last questions that I was going to tee up for you. But I interviewed a climate activist on my podcast, Bill McKibben. We haven't aired the podcast yet.
I know him. Mm-hmm.
But I've followed his work for a while. I've debated him before, and he agreed to come on the podcast, I think pretty reluctantly. But without discussing what I talked about with him, if you had a chance to sit down with him for, say, 20 minutes or 30 minutes or even 5 minutes, what would you say to him?
Africa needs fossil fuels, and I will explain in length why we need fossil fuels.
But so why do you think why do you think he and people like him are so opposed to this idea? Why do you think that I'll put it to you this way, because it's kind of how I see it, is that for him and people like him, well, the climate catastrophe is so much more important in the future than people now. I guess that's how I would condense what he says. But why, if you could guess, why do you think that he and people like him have this worldview that people like you shouldn't or don't need or shouldn't use fossil fuels? Why do you think their worldview is the way it is?
I think some of these people are okay. I'm not talking about him specifically, but most of these people, they are Malthusians. They hate humanity. They hate people. And the fact that people care about the environment more than they care about people is just alarming itself by itself. So what we should be after is like we should focus our debate, our arguments, our policies around human flourishing. Humans first. Uh, Everything else should come second. So I know for a fact many years the West has been worried about Africa developing and China developing, and that's not a good thing because a good example is the phosphate rock in Morocco.
Yeah.
We only have that. 70% is coming from Morocco. We only have that, I think 75%. So people are worried, like once Africa develops, we're going to be in big trouble. Once Africa starts using its own fossil fuels, we're going to be in trouble. Like there's a lot of Malthusianism going on throughout the world, and it's not good. That's why they're basing their arguments on the climate and not human flourishing.
So, well, let me read back to you what I think you're saying, Jesper. Let me just see if I'm understanding you right. That there's a movement in the West. The Western countries want to keep Africa down because if Africa rises, the West won't be as powerful. Is that a different way of saying
Yes.
what your view is?
Yes, that's
So,
it.
so let me just be devil's advocate here for a minute and say, okay, well, okay, here's Jusper Machogu, and he's saying all this stuff about hydrocarbon fossil fuels. I call them hydrocarbons because I don't like the term fossil fuels, but that, oh, well, he probably just works for ExxonMobil or he works for the oil companies or he's just a mouthpiece. This is just convenient for him to make these claims and, that he doesn't represent anybody but himself. He doesn't represent Africa. He's just talking, so I'm being provocative here, but how would you reply to that? I mean, would it make you mad? I mean, how would you reply to critics? Because this is something that, the climate activists in the West, immediately anyone who says something in favor of hydrocarbons, oh, well, you must work for ExxonMobil. So do you work for ExxonMobil?
Okay, so the way I would respond to that is I think I've done a lot to show people that I don't work for Exxon Mobil, sorry. So for instance, I have an internship program, Net Zero or Sustainable Internship in Kenya, in rural Kenya. I'm inviting people so that they come experience what it is like to live without fossil fuels, what it is like to do without energy, to live without energy. So I want them to come experience what it is like to live without energy. They're not going to like it, most of them, especially those saying Africa doesn't need fossil fuels. So I try to show people, like I go to the river. Okay, a good example. Last January, in January, we were fetching water 1 to 2 kilometers away, and you carry water like you carrying a bucket on your head, 1 kilometer away. So I can only imagine. Like, okay, a good example is also right now in Kenya, they have motorcycles. A few people have motorcycles, and that's like our main mode of transport,
Right.
especially in rural areas. So they have transformed our economy. That's for sure. Like we used to go harvest maize about 2 kilometers away, and we would carry it on our heads all the way home. But nowadays we have motorcycles. They do that work easily. Like what a motorcycle carries in maybe it carries around 150 kilos to 200 kilos in one trip, and one trip it takes like 5 minutes to and fro. I will take that. I will carry like 60 kilos, 50 kilos all the way home, and it will like I'd have to do it 3 trips or 4 trips. So like it's very clear. Machines, they amplify and expand our capabilities. That's for sure. So yeah, that's how I would respond to them. Come experience it. Come live with us. See how you like it.
Well, thank you. And I'm being provocative here, but I like the way you answered that. And I've seen your videos where you're carrying wood and the difficulty that you have and I was particularly interested in one piece that you published recently, and you talked about having to walk. I think it was where you were searching for a cow that had been stolen, and you walked all day, right? So I'll ask the question, do you have a motorcycle? Do you personally own one, or your family?
I don't. My family doesn't, but a few people in my village do.
So
It's how they earn a livelihood.
how much money do you make in a year, Jesper?
Um, okay, my family makes around I'd say okay, I don't know. Okay, let me just give you the figures
Okay.
and
And tell me
maybe
first
break it
about
down.
tell
So,
me about your family. So you mentioned there's six of you. So if you don't mind, before, because I'm asking you very personal questions, but this is what I do, right?
okay.
So, but how many? Six people in your family. So who's in your family? Who are living in the home that you live in Kisii?
Okay. So my dad, my mom,
Yeah.
and I'm the firstborn. I have a sister and two other brothers. So that makes six.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, six people.
And your siblings in it, none of you are married right now.
No,
And how old are you, Jasper?
I'm 28.
Uh-huh.
Very old.
Old man. Well, I'm going to be 63 in a few days. So you're a young man compared to me. So okay, so all six of you then, you all work on the farming and on your land?
No, not really. Okay, my sister, she's not at home. She's venturing, she's into business, although she hasn't really started. My bros are they currently in school. One is they actually one is joining university very soon, another one is in university. One more year left before he completes. Yeah.
I see. And what about your parents? What do they do?
They do farming. We also have a small shop, a tiny shop. But mostly we do farming. That's how we earn a livelihood.
And what is the shop that you sell something? Your mom
We usually sell basic commodities, soap, sugar, stuff like that. Usual.
uh-huh. So
Mhm.
then okay, so back to my other question then. So about how much money do you make per month or per year? Could you calculate it
Oh,
that way
okay.
from you're a subsistence farmer, so a lot of the what you grow you eat, right? But you also sell some part of that so that you can buy sugar, salt, etc., shoes, clothing, etc. So can you give me an idea what that income it looks like?
Okay. We make because okay, renting. Okay, let's say I'm going to lease land because that's what most people do. They lease land outside Kisii because Kisii is, I'd say, populated. Like we are because like this place is green, has got plenty of rainfall, it has got nice weather condition, so most people live around here. They don't want to live in other places, and it's very peaceful and stuff. So in a year I'd say we make around 300 to 600 USD
Uh-huh.
profits now. Most farmers, they make less than that. We have a few farmers because like I'm talking about Kisii. If you go to elsewhere, an example in our farm in the Rift Valley, we make around 800 to like 1500 per year.
And
So
is
it
that
really
because you're
depends.
leasing that land? I mean, are you able to cultivate that land in the Rift Valley as well as in Kisii? How do you manage that?
Okay, in the Rift Valley, we have a few people with tractors, so that reduces the cost completely. And also we use herbicides sometimes,
Uh-huh.
farmers over there, because like if you have 10 acres of land, how are you going to do weeding in
Uh-huh.
10 acres of land? It's undoable. So some people do use herbicides, and we also use herbicide, and that reduces the expenses by a big margin. And then over there, people use a lot of fertilizer. They use maybe 60 to 100 kilos of fertilizer per year.
Uh-huh.
So that's
Gotcha.
a good figure, and they generate more from their farms.
Right. And so if you could afford what would a tractor cost you? What types of tractors was there? Are you or what brand of tractors are common in Kenya? Is it a Ford tractor, or what are the ones that most people use there?
Over here we have John Deere, we have Case, we have Massey Ferguson, and what else? I think those ones. So
So most
if
American brands.
yeah, American brands.
So
I
how
haven't
expensive?
seen. I don't know if Case is American. Maybe is it
Yeah,
Chinese or
no,
Japanese? Maybe.
it's American. So
Oh,
how much would a tractor cost then if you wanted to buy one?
a tractor will cost, I think, 20,000, between 15,000 to 20,000. Yeah,
USD,
USD.
right? So that's just for you. That's completely. Is that even imaginable that you could have that much money?
No, I cannot. I cannot. Most families cannot. Actually, I don't know anybody around here who can afford a tractor comfortably.
Well, so you know what? It's a little sobering. I mean, it's a joy to talk to you because you're so fresh and kind of you're very engaged in what you're trying to do. But do you feel? I mean, you said you're 28, and I see how hard you work. Do you feel like I mean, how long can you do it? I guess is one of the things that's occurred to me. Like I'm an old man, right? I'm old, 30 some odd years older, 35 years older than you. The idea of being able to work in the field and be able to do the kind of physical labor you're doing, I don't think I could do it for more than an hour, maybe even 15 or 20 minutes. Are you concerned as you get to be older that your body won't be able to do the physical labor? I mean, this is one of the, because this is how you grow your food. It's really on human sweat and human horsepower that you're using to grow the food. Do you worry about as you get older that you won't be able to do it anymore, and who's going to take care of you? How do you think about that?
Okay, over here, most people are worried about having food today and tomorrow. We don't have to worry about uh 40 years, 50 years down the line. So I think that answers your question.
And how old is your dad?
My dad is 53.
But
He's
he
turning
works
54 very
on the
soon.
farm with you. He works in the field.
Not that much. He's lazy. In He's lazy,
now,
but he's a very good
would your
businessman.
dad appreciate you saying that he's lazy, man? You're not going
But
to show this
but
podcast to him, are you? You're not going to say, "Hey, Dad, look at what I'm telling you here on the
no,
disrespecting you on
no.
the Power Hungry podcast."
Okay, but we have people around here, 60 years old, 50 years old, working in their farms still. Like it's mind-boggling. It's unimaginable.
But that's
They
something
have
you
no option.
you
They
have
have
no.
no option.
It's
Yeah.
work. It's work or starve to death.
Yeah.
I mean, is it that? Is I put? That's my line. But is it that simple?
It's that simple. If you don't work, you don't eat.
So, what else would you say? I mean, I travel a lot. I'm a very fortunate man. But have you ever left Kenya? Have you ever been outside of Kenya? Have you been to How often do you go to Nairobi? Tell me about what other things you've done in your life.
Okay. When I was in university, we used to have this. We used to have
And where did you go to
many.
university? By the way, I'm sorry. Where did you go to university?
Okay, okay. So I've studied in Kenya, in the Rift Valley. Okay, we have 8-4-4 system, 8 years in primary school, 4 years in secondary, and 4 or 5 years in college. So eight plus four, I studied in Kisii. Locally, I was walking to school in the morning and evening and coming back home, doing the usual milking, going to fetch water um, some other times helping around our farm. So, okay, after that, I went to university in a place called Nakuru. So, in the Rift Valley, I studied agricultural engineering for 5 years. And during that time, I had the opportunity to travel around the country. We have been to various places, usually field work, because like we need lots of experience as agricultural engineers, visiting mostly clean energy sites. Like we will visit, we have hospitals in Kenya which the hospitals use human excretes. That's the
Uh-huh.
right word. So
Right.
they use human excrete to make biogas. So we visit them. I've been to Ngong. We have wind turbines over there, wind generation. So I've been there. We haven't been to a solar farm in Kenya, but we have been to other places. So back in university, we traveled a lot. So that was a good opportunity for me to learn and travel.
And so I'm just looking at the map here because I don't know my African geography very well, but Nakuru is almost directly east of Kisii, and it's
Yeah.
north of Nairobi. So
Mhm.
just for people if they're thinking about Kenya and where Kenya is. What's interesting as well to me about what's happening in Africa now, and Kenya is on the eastern part of or the Horn of Africa, along with Somalia and Tanzania. Massive gas discoveries that have occurred in Africa over the last few years. Tanzania, Mozambique, these are just staggeringly large gas deposits. Most of them offshore, from what I understand. And I wrote a piece recently about Angola and the fact that the American government was not allowing, or rather, was lending money to Angola so they could build a solar project. And my point was, why aren't they lending money so Angola can use its natural gas? So, what do you think about? Have you thought much, or do you know much about the natural gas deposits in Africa? Because these discoveries, and ExxonMobil's been one of the companies that has found huge amounts of gas offshore Africa. What do you know about the gas deposits there, and what should Africa be doing with regard to those deposits?
Okay, I know Africa is mostly unexplored. Even in Kenya, we have oil. I think we have oil deposits somewhere, but we usually don't hear much about it because I don't know how. Anyway, I don't know much about it because the government is doing a lot of work to ensure that we citizens don't know what's going on over there. I don't
Mm.
know if they're drilling the oil. Tallow oil is over there. I don't know what is really happening. So the problem we have in Africa is we drilling our oil and selling it outside the country. In Kenya, for instance, outside the continent, in Kenya, for instance, we importing oil all the way from the Middle East.
Right.
It doesn't make sense when there is oil in Nigeria, there is oil in Egypt, in South Sudan. Like South Sudan is in East Africa. Why are we buying oil all the way from Middle East? Like it doesn't make sense. So there is a lot of um, I don't know the right word to use, but what the West is doing to us is not good. So a good example recently, I think there were people from Germany, the Germany government. They came over to Kenya. They went to Namibia. They were preaching, "Oh, we want to help you guys, and we're going to set up a hydrogen plant in
Oh,
Kenya and in Namibia." So
I saw this headline. Yeah. Right.
yeah, the reason they're doing that is because has like done a lot of harm on its energy. Like they chasing the green energy. They Yeah, so solar and wind, and that doesn't make sense completely. So a good example, solar works in Germany. It works only 12% of the time. Even in Africa, 25% of the time. So yesterday there was her name is Inga Anderson. I think she works for the UN. She's the Kenyan spokes lady. So she went to Morocco. She visited Morocco. There's a big solar power plant that has been installed, I think 400 to 600 megawatts. So she was saying like Morocco has done a lot of good work, but it's not good work. Anyway, it's all crazy. So what the West is doing isn't good. They a
Is
good
it is it
another
is
good
it is it is it green? I mean, this has been called green colonialism and carbon imperialism, green imperialism. Do any of those phrases make sense to you? You said
they
it's not
make
good,
sense.
and I agree. But if there is, Vijaya Ramachandran has called it what a green colonialism. Does that phrase make sense to you?
It makes sense because, like, okay, we have big problems in Africa, and those problems have been researched and they have been listed by the UN because the UN does a lot of good work on that. So they have these 17 sustainable development goals, and they ensuring that if like the developing world is going to develop, they need to try and find a way to work on along the sustainable development goals. And once you look at it, you realize all of these sustainable development goals, they are tied to climate change. Like if we want to beat poverty, it's tied to climate change. We have to do it sustainably. Sustainably means climate change. If we want to beat hunger sustainably, so all of that, to realize that all of that is tied to climate change. That means we don't use fossil fuels because fossil fuels are bad for the environment, for the climate. And that's not a good thing. We cannot develop miners using our fossil fuels. We cannot. And even if, okay, people are giving us loans, they wanted to develop ABC. When we have our own oil, when we have our own natural gas deposits, doesn't make sense at all. And those loans, usually, they called debt traps. They just trapping us so that we owe the West for coming years, very many years down the line, we still be paying their debts.
Well, and that's the part that to me was just so outrageous. And I will use that word about the Angola deal with the Export Import Bank, was that Angola is a member of OPEC. They have enormous oil and gas resources. They should be using them. And instead, President Biden went to an extremely expensive fundraiser for a big environmental group, the League of Conservation Voters in Washington, D.C., and bragged about the fact that they're lending $900 million to Angola to build a solar project. And I thought, man, the world has gone completely crazy. I mean, it just has gone nuts.
And the funny thing, Robert, the funny thing is these people, the countries that preach climate change, net zero, these are the countries that use a lot of fossil fuels. For instance, the US uses about 18 to 20 million barrels of oil per day.
Right.
If you come to Africa, we use so little, 4 million barrels of oil per day. If you go to China, something like 12. If you go to India, 5.2. That's a lot. So Africa is down there. In East Africa, 470 million people, almost a half a billion people. We use so little, I think 600 to 700,000, 600,000 to 700,000 barrels of oil per day. So the US has only 330 million people. It doesn't make sense. So how do you even start coming to Africa and preaching green energy, solar and wind? How?
It is a remarkable disparity. And I mentioned the electricity disparity, 200 kilowatt hours per capita per year. But what you're telling me, in fact, in your family, you're saying that in your family, if you're using 12 kilowatt to 15 kilowatt hours per capita in your house, and there's 6 of you, well, then you are using maybe 12 or 15 kilowatt hours per year, right? I mean, well, no, it'll be twice that, right? So maybe 30 or 50 kilowatt hours per year. You yourself, this is a tiny amount of electricity. And I'm not bragging, you haven't been to the US, but Americans will, I don't have one, but they'll go camping, right? They'll go out in the countryside and they'll take a generator with them. They'll use more electricity on vacation than you use in your house. I mean, this is just like, man, we don't, we take it for granted. So let's zoom out a little bit, Jusper. Tell me, I know you live in Kisii and you're not in Nairobi where the central government is, but tell me about Kenyan politics. I mean, has the Kenyan government been forced into this kind of green energy? I'll say this: the green energy trap. Have they been forced into this, or are they saying no? We need hydrocarbons. I wrote about the South African energy minister just today, talking about the fact that South Africa has large oil and gas reserves and that they should be developing them. So what is the sentiment in the national government in Kenya about energy and power and where the country is going?
Our current president is a climate zealot. I don't know if that's the right word, but he's into climate change and conserving the environment, preserving the environment, all of that. So that's why we are seeing people coming all the way from Germany preaching hydrogen in Kenya. It doesn't make sense. So it's really destroying our economy, because recently, I think last week, the IMF and World Bank were congratulating our government for ending fertilizer and fuel subsidies. That's a good thing. That's not a good thing. So from last year, our fuel prices have gone up. So last year, okay, back in 2020, I was buying a bag of fertilizer at around that $3 by 50 kilograms of DAP. Right now, we're buying it at 69 to 72. It really depends where you're getting it from. So
I'm sorry, give me those numbers again. Give me those numbers again, if you don't mind, Jasper.
Okay,
so in 2020, you were paying $3 for 50 kilos.
$33 per 50 kg DAP.
Yeah, right.
Right now, we're buying it at 69. The same bag, 50 kilograms.
You went from $3 to $69.
No,
629, $6 or $9, right? So it's tripled in price.
Okay, it has gone up by 2 times.
2 times. So now it's $6. $6 for 50 kilos.
Not $6, 60. $30 to $60.
So
you getting it?
Yeah, I think I am. So it went. So I just want to be clear. It's doubled in price, or it's gone up?
Yes.
Oh, it's doubled. So it went from $30 for 50 kilos. Okay.
Yeah.
Forgive me. The audio, or I'm just getting deaf. So you were paying 3 years ago. You were paying $30 for 50 kilos of this nitrogen fertilizer. What kind of fertilizer is it?
DAP. DAP is the ammonium phosphate. I think that's the planting fertilizer. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And now, so the price has doubled, and so you're using less.
Of course, people are using less. It's not like our whatever we were producing has gone up. So it's all crazy, and that's why I think we importing more maize into the country. Most people didn't. Actually, most people in this season, the Feb season, didn't plant using fertilizer. Most people just, like, if I was buying fertilizer I was using $5 to buy fertilizer, an example. I'm still using $5 to buy fertilizer, only that I'm getting less fertilizer, and that's what I'm going to take to my farm.
Right.
It's all crazy. Yeah.
So the president of Kenya, the president now is William Ruto, as I've got this right. I just looked it up. So again, I don't know my Kenya.
So these people, what they're doing to us is not good. I don't know if we've been pushed to the wall, but he should be in a position to say no, because like once we don't have access to fertilizers, we are doomed. Because like if you look at Africa, most of the food that we have been producing, it has been usually from clearing more land for farming. And like in other places, in a place like China, it's usually from increasing the amount of applied fertilizer. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I want to read that back to you. You said if we don't have access to fertilizer, we are doomed.
Yes.
And fertilizer,
we can't live on aid.
We can't live on aid. And fertilizer is made from hydrocarbons, mainly from natural gas, right? From the Haber-Bosch process. So if you don't have natural gas, you don't have fertilizer. And if you don't have fertilizer, you're doomed, because you will be dependent on imports, which are going to be more expensive, or you just won't be able to afford it. So so what do you, if you had let me talk about Substack first. So how did you get on Substack? Because again, this is one of the things that I'm all in on Substack, by the way. I don't, Jusper is on Substack, juspermachogu.substack.com. You can help him out by buying, he has pineapples on there. I like his pineapple
Thank you.
insignia there. How did you end up on Substack? How did you find Substack? You found it on your phone? How do you know about this?
I've been on Twitter for a very long time. I think
Uh-huh.
my Twitter is from 2013 or something. Although I wasn't using it that much, I started using it, I think, from 2019. So I've been active on Twitter from 2019 onwards. And I've also been okay, I know Alex Epstein, and he's been like a mentor to me. I actually wanted to do Patreon, and I was stuck between Patreon and Substack, and I talked to Alex, and he was like, "Oh, you do Substack. Substack is better." And I just decided I'll do Substack. Yeah.
I see. Okay, well,
So
I
I've known
forgot.
it.
I forgot you are on Twitter and you have 22,000 followers on Twitter. You're at Jusper Machogu, and you post your videos there as well. I don't know how I forgot about that. I knew you were on Twitter, but
Yeah.
nevertheless.
And I fight the green colonialism over there.
So, um, so if you had a few, we've been talking almost an hour, so I don't want to keep you. I know you have other things to do, and if you could talk to the U.S. policymakers, like the Export Import Bank. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned we talked about if you had a chance with Bill McKibben or some other climate activist, but if you had a chance with policymakers and wanted to straighten them out, as we say in the U.S. So you wanted to make them understand what the reality of your life is and what life is like in for other people in Kisii and around you. What would you say to them?
Okay. I would tell them to focus every other policy around human flourishing, especially in Africa, human flourishing. A fed Africa, a rich Africa is good for everyone. So basing their policies around the climate change and the environment isn't good. It's not doing us any good, especially the UN. Like if I got a chance to talk to the UN directly, I will tell them we're going to scrub away the Sustainable Development Goals, because like each and every goal is focused on it's based on climate change, and that's not a good thing. So we're going to find our own. We're going to model Africa in our own way, and that's going to be with lots of energy, lots of our own energy. We're not going to ask for aid. Like if you're going to invest in our oil and gas, good for you, because like that's just business. You're not giving us aid. You're not giving us free food. So we need fossil fuels. That's how we're going to develop. We need lots of fossil fuels. We need fertilizers. We need farm machines. We need to build our houses. That's cement and steel. So fossil fuels for Africa. That's what I will tell them.
Good. Well, I always ask my guests what they're reading. I know you've been to university, so I ask guests what books are on their list, or I don't know if if you're a book guy or you've spent so much time in work. Tell me, what are you reading these days?
Okay, right now I think I'm reading. I'm planning to read Meredith Anjuin. I think that's her name.
Oh,
Shooting the Grid.
Meredith Angwin.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. All right.
I plan to read Shooting the Grid.
Yeah. Here, let me see now. Here it is. Shorting the Grid.
Wow.
I think I've sold more of Meredith's books than I've sold of my own, but that's good to hear that you're planning to read her book. She's a marvel. I mean, just a tremendously effective. She self-published her book, but okay. So Meredith Angwin, please continue.
Okay. So that's what I plan to read next. But my favorite books, I think I'd have like four. I think four. So one is Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom by Patrick Moore.
Right.
Two is, of course, our own Vaclav's Mill, How the World Really Works.
Right. Yeah.
Three, I think, okay, Unsettled, Steve Koonin.
Right.
Yeah, four. Let me say five. One of like I recently read Inconvenient Facts by Gregory Wrightstone. It's a really nice book, and it's just short,
Right.
precise. It's just amazing. So my favorite is Fossil Future by Alex Epstein. I really love that book. Just amazing.
Good. And
Yeah,
last question, Jusper, what gives you hope?
that's a tricky question. What gives me hope? Okay, I know for a fact because we're going to develop inevitably. We're going to beat poverty inevitably. My people, Africa, we are a generation of young people, 20 years of median age. So I know for a fact these people are going to wake up. They're going to fight to develop themselves, fight to better themselves, and that gives me hope. They're going to it's going to happen inevitably.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop. My guest has been Jusper Machogu. You can find him on Twitter at Jusper Machogu. He's also on Substack, where you can help him out by buying him some pineapples on that spot, juspermachogu.substack.com. Jusper, it's been a joy to talk to you. I'm pleased that we were able to make this happen, and that through the wonder of the internet, we're able to become friends, and I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Thank you very much. And also, I look forward to talking to you some more.
Good. Well, so again, thanks to Jusper, and thanks to all of you in podcast land for tuning into this episode of the Power Hungry Podcast. If you're so inclined to give us a 5, 6, 12-star rating, whatever it is that you can do on those rating machines. And you can follow me, of course, on Substack, robertbryce.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, see ya.